Welcome back. All right. So what I've got on this board, brand new board too, by the way. I had to replace out. There's one old board that was still left over that really getting close to the point of completely smashing. That yeah, I've been able to keep it together for videos, but I replaced it today. It's also got scratches all over it. So there's that. And whether or not they're perceptible on camera, they're perceptible to me. So 32 teams, right? Starting in the fall, there's 32 teams. I want to talk about all the GMs, and I want to keep this as quick as possible because brevity's the soul of wit, right? Yeah, So, we're starting with Anaheim, we're ending with Winnipeg. Sorry, Winnipeg, today the alphabet exists. So, Bob Murray, hired November 12th of 2008. And how you feel about the job Bob Murray's done may depend on whether or not you're a Ducks fan. It feels like there's more of a push within Ducks fandom to see him replaced than I think there is outside of Ducks fandom. They're going through a rebuild. I think his draft picks have been pretty good. I think we've seen that with Zegras. We've seen that with Drysdale. I really think that there's still, a good turnaround that's coming for Anaheim. So while people may be of the mind that maybe Murray ends up being out of a job, I don't see that happening. I legit don't see that happening. I think he's done a decent job. And the funny thing, too, is at some point I'm going to do a video on every team's worst contracts. I'm going to do that after the season's done. And we'll see whether or not, and I may go by who signed those contracts, too. Like, which team signed those contracts rather than which team currently has those bad contracts. But, yeah, so Bob Murray, to me, I don't necessarily think his job's in danger. Bill Armstrong in Arizona. He was only hired September 17th of last year. There's no danger to his job, and I think he's done as well as can be expected over such a short period of time without the kind of cap space needed to really improve things for the Coyotes. So I think if there was a report card for him, it'd be incomplete right now. Don Sweeney took over May 20th of 2015, which means he was in charge for a month before that draft where they were drafting and could have had some really good players and went the other way with it. But he's been very good for them overall. And the funny thing is, I know there's Boston fans that are still mad about last year's free agency, but they didn't have the cap space. So it's one of those things, right, where it's like, okay, so a GM, you want him to add in the offseason, but he doesn't have the cap space. Do you get mad at said GM for not having the cap space to fix things? Or do you understand that and so you're more forgiving? And I think for Don Sweeney, I don't think there's any danger of him losing his job. I really don't, although there are some Bruins fans that think he should go. In part based on, not getting enough done. I think what he did at the trade deadline likely has bought him some more leeway with fans. But if this team gets swept in the first round of the playoffs, that will change. Buffalo, they only hired Kevin Adams June 16th of 2020. I know Buffalo fans would like to see things get better. I think they will. And I think Adams needs to have time to actually make the right changes. And I think he will. Because I think teams in general are pretty smart when it comes to hiring general managers. I know there are some people have question marks about, but I think Adams should have some time. I think a minimum amount of time you can give a GM. If a team's in a rebuild, you give them, 3 years? Right? If a team is going into a rebuild, you maybe give them 5 to really figure it out. If a team is pretty good, it all then depends on what the expectation is from there and whether or not they reach it. But Adams, no problem. Brad Treliving, April 18th of 2014. So we always hear about Vancouver's GM problem and GM problem, this and that. Calgary, I do wonder with Treliving. Now, he's a smart man, very well spoken, seems to have a good idea of what he wants out on the ice. But this was a team that disappointed last year, and I'm not sure the right moves were made in order to fix things in Calgary. He threw money at Markstrom and at Tanev, and he did his best to try to fix things that he felt were wrong with the team. Those moves haven't necessarily panned out. And the Markstrom contract may not age very well. So Treliving to me is one of those GMs that if after this season, Calgary misses the playoffs after this season, they're like, well, we've decided to relieve Brad Treliving of his duties. I wouldn't be entirely surprised, but he may very well have a longer leash than that. It may take another year before he'd actually have any kind of danger to his job. Don Waddell, hired May 8th of 2018, has done an amazing job with the Carolina Hurricanes. There really hasn't been any egregiously bad move made since he took over. He has done very well. I think, honestly, we can look back at his time in Atlanta, and I think he's learned a lot from that. I really do. I look at the way he's running the Carolina Hurricanes. He's learned a lot. And full credit to Ron Francis, the guy who preceded him. I think Ron Francis had a lot of the pieces there that we're now starting to see bear out. But Waddell knew how to augment that and seemed to have a good idea of how to fix the issues that Carolina team had. So we can't say that if Francis had stayed in Carolina, they would be where they are right now. We also can't say that they would have fallen apart. We just don't know. But what we can agree on is Waddell's done a pretty good job. Stan Bowman, hired July 14th of 2009 by the Chicago Blackhawks. They've won 3 Stanley Cups under his watch. But there's a divide in the Hawks fandom about whether or not those are his Stanley Cups, how much credit he should get for those Stanley Cups. The reality is, though, if you're a GM of a team that wins 3 Stanley Cups, you're going to have a lot of leeway. You're going to have a lot. It's one of those things where ownership's going to look and go, well, we've won 3 championships while you've been in charge. We're going to give you some extra years to figure out how to fix this. And to me, that means throughout a rebuild, if they ever actually go into it, he's going to be the guy in charge. And with all the young players that have hit that lineup this year, and they've got Lankinen in net now, and Kirby Dach's looked really solid since returning from injury, I don't think Bowman's in any danger, and I don't think Chicago needs a rebuild now. I really don't. I think with the amount of young players in this lineup, they may just need 1 or 2 pieces, and I'm sure there's another former Blackhawk out there that Bowman can pick up to fill in, right? So that seems to be the case. And usually it's a former Blackhawk coming back. Bowman's safe as far as I can tell. Joe Sakic. So he's hired September 19th of 2014, and I was one of those who was saying Joe Sakic might be in over his head during the whole Matt Duchene thing, where we knew Duchene wanted out. We knew they wanted him out. They just couldn't make it happen. So it took a long time. Matt Duchene finally gets traded, and ever since then, Sakic hasn't done anything wrong when it comes to trades. Not really. You can find a couple that maybe you could argue they lose by a little bit, but honestly, he's done very, very well. Devon Taves coming out of New York comes to mind right away as a guy that was this low key kind of pickup that's worked out so well. And Sakic, he does a very good job, and he's got young defensemen in Makar and Byram that are going to make that team a force for a long time to come. Columbus, of course, you have Jarmo Kekalainen, hired February 13th of 2013. Now, for Jarmo, he has led this team through the greatest success they've had. We can then have the debate about whether or not that's enough success for their fans, whether or not that's enough success for him to stick around. But Jarmo's done as good a job as he can, considering it seems like a lot of players have wanted out of Columbus. Now, he'll likely make a change behind the bench at the end of this season. He will likely have to make some moves during the summer. I don't think Kekalainen's job's in any kind of peril, but this coming year will likely make that decision about whether or not he sticks around long term. Jim Nill, hired April 29th of 2013 by the Stars. When the Stars hired him, I was excited. Jim Nill, who had been a part of the Bruins organization, played for the Canucks, now in Dallas. That's the Holy Trinity, right? The 3 teams I've cheered for. So it's like, okay, Jim Nill, GM of Dallas. I have been angry with his GMing. I've been happy with his GMing right now. It's pretty good. The one thing I always point to is, really, you're going to add Antti Niemi to Kari Lehtinen? You're going to pay $9 million for your goaltenders? Okay, all right, fine, sure, yep, okay. That's great, cool. Great, thanks. So, but outside of that, honestly, he's done a very good job. I know there's been some misses here and there at the draft table, but he's done a pretty good job of putting this team together. And some of the young kids who can be directly traced to Jim Nill picking them up, whether it's draft, free agency, or trade, they all look pretty good. So it looks like Dallas should be a team that's at least in the mix for the next few years. He's safe. Steve Eiserman is, of course, a guy who could run for mayor of Detroit and win. April 19th of 2019, he's hired as GM. He could probably be the governor of Michigan. Eiserman's very popular, and he's doing a good job of stocking this team with young prospects in a way that they haven't had since he was brought into the league initially back in the early 80s. Ken Holland in Winnipeg, in Edmonton. There's foreshadowing for you. Someday Ken Holland will be hired by Winnipeg, and somebody's going to go, Shannon knew in that video. So Edmonton, May 7th of 2019, Ken Holland was hired by the Oilers. And I think we can agree that Holland has done a very good job. I think the first 2 years under Ken Holland have been excellent. And it's interesting because, again, it's one of those situations where a GM comes in and you kind of expect everything to get torn out, and he didn't do it. He just kind of comes in and goes, okay, here's, and it was kind of a surgical precision thing of here's what needs to be fixed. I know when he left Detroit, people were upset. I think what happened to him in Detroit was I think he was very loyal to the players, and probably to a fault, where he was probably giving them too much money, too much term, and in getting to Edmonton, he didn't have that connection with all the players, so he's able to make a more objective decision. And there are other GMs that do that in the league as well. So Holland has done very well with the Oilers. He's got a bunch of cap space this summer. We'll see how things turn out for Edmonton, but yeah, Holland's really in a good spot there. Bill Zito for Florida. September 2nd of 2020, he was hired. He has done a very good job. The most recent one being Sam Bennett, who has 10 points in 7 games. 4 of those points are goals. I know, but they're secondary assists. Doesn't matter. I've discussed why secondary assists versus primary assists to me is kind of disingenuous. And I mean, I can have that argument again after the season, but for right now, Zito looks pretty smart. He has done a very good job, and yeah, I really think this summer is going to be very telling too. But it's worked out pretty well so far for Florida. They're one of the top 3 teams in that division. They're right there with Carolina and Tampa, and I think that says a lot about the job he's done. Rob Blake, April 10th of 2017. It's still too early to know whether or not this rebuild's going to be 100% successful, but so far it looks pretty good. And last night we saw the debut of Byfield. He looked pretty good. So as long as those rookies are being developed properly, as long as Turcotte comes along, as long as they're able to get Velarde to that next level, Kings are going to be all right. So it's still too early to know, but signs are pointing towards success for Rob Blake. Bill Garan, August 21st of 2019, was hired by Minnesota. And it's odd, you know. Some of the moves he made in the offseason were like, really? I'm trading out centers. We need to fix our center position. Then why are you trading centers when you need more centers? Oh, we're going to get a goal. We're going to get Talbot to be our starter. You sure about Talbot? It's worked out really well. It's worked out really well this year. Garen's bought himself definitely more time as GM. Montreal, Marc Bergevin, May 2nd, 2012, he's hired. He's one of the longer-serving GMs in the National Hockey League. And honestly, depends on the day or the week, right? Bergevin, there's been times where everybody wants him fired, and there's other times where everybody might be willing to make him the premier of Quebec. So for Bergevin, it depends on the day, it depends on the week. But I would say his job's pretty stable because they've made the playoffs this year. They're in 4th right now. They're not going to get caught by Calgary. So Montreal's making the playoffs this year. That buys them at least next year. And with all the young kids coming up and just with the lineup they've got together, Montreal should be able to stay in the mix. And as long as they're in the mix, I don't think he goes anywhere. Nashville, David Poile, July 9th, 1997. I really thought early in the season it looked like David Poile's magic touch with the Predators might be done. And for Nashville, might be time to look for another GM. And they still might. This still might be a situation where at the end of this season, if they finish 4th, they go out in the first round, maybe we see a change at the GM spot, and maybe he makes that call. He's been there for 24 years. He may very well make that call. But for David Poile, it is odd, right? 24 years, they've never won the Cup under him, but they've stayed competitive under him. There's never really been a Nashville like full-on rebuild, right? And maybe that's where they end up soon, but I don't know. I mean, weird thing with Poile is even though the contracts for Johansson and Duchesne are not great, right? There's enough other contracts that are decent bargains, and there's enough guys here on entry level or lower cost contracts that it hasn't really been a problem for Nashville yet. Tom Fitzgerald, New Jersey, January 12th, 2020. Reported by Elliot Friedman, they're looking at an extension for him. They're happy with the job he's done so far. And New Jersey could be a team to watch next year. They could be one of those surprise teams next year that suddenly gets a playoff spot. We'll see. But Fitzgerald's very safe. Lou Lemarello, June 5th, 2018. He will be GM in New York, I think, until he retires. I can't see for the New York Islanders anything changing with that. There's the outside chance that they're caught by the Rangers, passed by the Bruins, that they could end up out of the playoffs. Does that change the picture? Probably not. I think Trotz and Lemarello, I think, are there for at least a couple more years. And again, I think he'll dictate it, how long he's there. I think part of the reason Lou went to New York was just to prove, hey, I can still do this. Because Toronto kind of went, it's nice. Can you stay in an advisory role? Which he may have taken personally and said, yeah, I'm still a GM. I can still do this. I can still run things. And he's done a good job with the Islanders so far. Jeff Gorton, New York Rangers, July 1st of 2015. And there are some opinions that he should go. There are some opinions he should stay. I'm of the opinion he should stay. This is a good young roster that's been put together. And you can say, well, it's a no-brainer to draft a guy in that spot. Well, Kakko and Lafreniere, they were no-brainers. Right, but the way that this retool has been done has been okay. And honestly, this is a team that when they're going, they're one of the most exciting teams in hockey. And a lot of it has to do with the players he's acquired, whether it's through draft, trade, or signing. So, yeah, he's done a very good job. I would look at the Adam Fox trade. And I know Carolina had to trade him because he was just going to go to free agency, but that was a steal. Adam Fox is arguably one of the best defensemen in the NHL right now. And so Gorton deserves some credit for that. Pierre Dorion, hired April 10th of 2016 by the Ottawa Senators, not by New York, by Ottawa. And he has done a very good job, I think, of restocking that pipeline and helping to turn things around. Look, 2 years ago, we're talking about what a disaster Ottawa is, and that these draft picks that they traded, the first-round picks, end up being pretty decent draft picks, right? Pretty high draft picks, which they didn't know at the time. But they've recovered from that, and they've still managed to stock their pipeline with some good first-round picks, some smart picks later in the draft. Dorion's at least proven he knows how to draft and develop. The next part of that is he needs to prove that he can take a team which is fringe right now, right? Team that might take that next step next year, or they might stay at that same level of being, towards the bottom of the league. He needs to show he knows which pieces to add in order to get them to that next stage. I think the move to bring in somebody new as a goaltender coach, because Matt Murray's stats aren't necessarily where you want them to be, I think that's a smart move. And we'll see how it goes for them next year. It's way too early to say one way or the other, but I think we'll see where they're at next year. Be very interesting to see. Philly, Chuck Fletcher, December 3rd, 2018. They're an up-and-down team. I really don't know what Chuck Fletcher could do differently right now. It's an unenviable position to be in, trying to make Philadelphia good every single year. I don't think Chuck Fletcher's in any danger, though. I don't think. And yet it's Philly, right? Things can change in Philly very quickly. They've gone through a lot of goaltenders, coaches. It just, things can change very quickly. I would not be surprised if Alain Vigneault is gone at the end of the year, and watch them go, hey, look, Mike Keenan's back, and then everybody, they don't learn. Pittsburgh, Ron Hextall, who had been the general manager, of course, for Philadelphia. He was hired February 9th of 2021. And is an example of how sometimes you just get into the job at the exact right time. So at the time he comes in, Jim Rutherford's, retired. And a lot of people are mad about the moves Jim Rutherford made. Now they're all terrible and this team doesn't look very good. Hextall takes over. No moves made in the beginning, and Pittsburgh just starts winning. And probably looking around going, I don't know why anybody else thought this job was difficult. I just sat down and they started winning. So I'll take my check now. All right. But I do like Ron Hextall as a GM. I understand when he left Philly, it was basically an untenable situation. As long as he can avoid an untenable situation in Pittsburgh, he's pretty secure there, and I think he'll do a pretty good job. Doug Wilson, May 13th of 2003, hired by San Jose. I found a list. I was looking up lists of who people feel is the best general manager in the league. Doug Wilson still shows up in a lot of top 10s. He still does, as recently as last fall. And early in 2021, I was still seeing lists where he's top 10. I wouldn't have him in the top 10. And I think, to me, where Wilson loses me is the Erik Karlsson contract, where they opted to keep Karlsson at that huge figure and let Pavelski go. And just, I think that just changed everything about the team. Look what Pavelski's done for Dallas. He's been great this year. He had an off year last year offensively during the regular season, but then in the playoffs, he was arguably one of their best players. So there's been some missteps for me with Doug Wilson. I remember when they signed Erik Karlsson, me kind of thinking, but they already have Brent Burns. Like, I understand if you can have the two, that's fine, but with that amount of money, they already have Brent Burns. Karlsson and Burns serve a very similar role on the team. And so, yeah, that's just that to me. That's where that gets lost. But I still don't get the feeling like he's in any danger in San Jose losing his job. We'll see. If there's a GM on here, I wouldn't be surprised necessarily at the end of the season to hear that a team's moving on from it. It might be him. Now, if it happens, I also wouldn't be surprised if it's one of those situations where we're making him executive vice president of operations. We've actually promoted him, and then they bring in a new GM, and what they've done is they've just given him a different job, and they might have actually given him more money or just kept him at the same money on a contract, but they gave the GM job to somebody else. Ron Francis, hired July 18th of 2019. This is where I could make a joke that Seattle hasn't won a game yet. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say that the management group that's been put together so far by Seattle looks good. And we're not going to know where they're at until the fall. I will say for Ron Francis again, Carolina is a really good team right now, and a lot of the players on that team were there under Ron Francis. Maybe Ron Francis drafted them, traded for them, or signed them. But Francis has a good idea, I think, of how to put together a decent team. That idea of putting together a champion, he hasn't proven that. We'll see how things go at the expansion draft. All eyes will be on him in July, basically 2 years to the day after he's hired, almost anyways. He'll be putting together their roster, and then we'll get an idea for just how smart things have been. And look for trades before that expansion draft, where he's bringing players in that will be his way of promising a team. I'm not going to take that guy who's exposed, so I'll take that guy instead. Vegas had that. I'm sure Seattle will too. Not necessarily to the same extent, but it'll happen. St. Louis, Doug Armstrong, July 1st of 2010. They won the Cup in 2019. The team's gone on a nice little run here lately. Armstrong is safe. You bring a championship to St. Louis, I would think you're safe for at least another year. If this team were to fall back next year, if you can trace it to bad moves by Doug Armstrong that make that happen, maybe. Julian Brisbaugh in Tampa, they won the Stanley Cup last year, so he's hired September 11th of 2018. And whether you may argue, well, he's riding the coattails of Eiserman, and you're going to hear that because, yeah, of course. I would disagree, though. I would say Gaudreau and Coleman were huge pickups for this team. And, you know, he kind of went out on a limb and picked up Savard at the deadline this year. We'll see whether that works out, but he's not going anywhere for quite a while, I would think, after winning a Stanley Cup as GM. Kyle Dubus, May 11th, 2018. It really depends on your opinion on Kyle Dubus. Do I think he gives too much money to certain players? Yes. Do I think he makes very good trades? Yeah, he's made some really good deals. And he's also made some good signings of depth players that have allowed them to still stay under the cap. The cap's going to be a challenge for Toronto for at least the next couple of years, you've got to think, if they're going to stay in contention anyways and not sell anybody off. But I think he's done a good job. And so while there's still the, why does Dubas still have a job kind of thing, he's only been there for 3 years. He's still really young. There is some learning on the job, I think, that takes place with him. And I think the contract negotiations are where some of that shows up. But I think he's done a good job. I think he cares a lot about the players. I think that shows through in negotiations. It also shows through if a player's not feeling well or if a player's having problems. Dubas, it's very clear from reports that he's close to the players and he's very caring of their needs and of what's going on in their life, not just on the ice. So, yeah, there's reasons to look at Dubas and say, once he's really grown into this role, he could end up being one of the best GMs in the league. We could be talking about him 5 years from now and say, we can't envision anybody else running the Toronto Maple Leafs. We could end up there. Which brings me to Vancouver. Jim Benning. May 21st, 2014, they flew a banner over Vancouver asking for him to be fired. Surprise, surprise, it didn't happen. You can't fire by banner, so it doesn't happen. But Benning, here's the thing. There are things I like Benning's done. Let me finish. Let Let me finish, Vancouver fans. There's things I like that he's done, and there are things he's done that I think have held the team back and have been a problem. Do I feel that he should be fired? I think at the end of this season, given everything that's taken place, if the team comes out and says we've decided to move on from Jim Benning, I would 100% support that decision. You will hear no complaints from me and no defending of the good things I think he's done, because I think that the payment for some of these guys in the bottom six, the payment for the bottom two defensemen, I think it's just left them in a really bad place and a situation where they're always going to be fighting with the cap when they shouldn't be, considering everything that's going on, considering the team hasn't been very successful. And the fact the team hasn't been very successful can be used as a reason to move on from Benning. But I don't expect anything to happen, because I think with this season being as it is, and with the month of shutdown, even if they'd lost all 19 games over 32 days, I still don't think he loses his job. I think we would have heard the owner saying, okay, well, this was a completely different situation. Thanks to the players for giving it their best and giving it their all. But we're going to treat this season like it's just this tournament that went bad, and we'll just look forward to next season. And I expect that to happen. And then I expect fans in the area here to be completely reasonable and rational about it. Sure. Vegas, Kelly McCrimmon, September 1st, 2019. The funny thing with McCrimmon to me is he does take some fire for some of the moves he makes, but George McPhee's still there too. McPhee is still the one that's consulting, and I'm sure when McCrimmon's making deals that he and McPhee are talking about this together. I'm not saying McCrimmon's not the actual GM. I'm just saying that I think it's the two of them that probably work together on these sort of deals. They're number one in the NHL right now. McCrimmon is as safe as they get. So even if Vegas were to go out in the first round this year, McCrimmon's not going anywhere. Your team finishes first, your GM's sticking around. Brian McClellan, May 26, 2014. And there are times where people aren't all that happy about McClellan. Picking up Mantha ends up being a smart move. I know they lose a draft pick here, but they lose that draft pick because they were trying to get cap space by getting rid of Panik's contract, which they did. And winning a Stanley Cup in 2018 also insulates McClellan, I think, to some point, because this was a franchise that never had that postseason success until he was GM. And so, yeah, McClellan. And the other thing, too, is that if he can talk Ovechkin into staying, he's safe as they get. If they lose Ovechkin, and if something happens in negotiations between he and Ovechkin that end up making it turn ugly, then we can have a different conversation, especially if Ovechkin signed with another NHL team. But at this point, yeah, that's the only thing I could see even affecting it at all. And Winnipeg, Kevin Cheveldayoff, June 8th, 2011. My biggest complaint about Cheveldayoff years back was that he just didn't make enough trades, I felt, to really improve things. I've started to hear that again. And mostly about the blue line. And I can't argue against that. While there are some guys on the Winnipeg blue line that have stepped up, I still don't know that blue line's good enough. We'll see in the postseason what happens. I think the Line A trade was bold move that I didn't see coming at all, and yet Dubois worked out okay. He's worked out well. We'll see how things go during the offseason. Sort of like, coming back to Kekalainen, how the Line A negotiations turn out could decide with Kekalainen. How things work out with Dubois could decide things for Cheveldayoff as well. This is a Winnipeg Jets team that's good, not great. And they've been on the verge of being great for a while. And eventually Winnipeg ownership might want to make a change, because they might say, you know what, Cheveldayoff's been good. He's been a good foot soldier for us for a decade. But we want somebody we feel can take us to that next level. Which would mean somebody else on this board would likely have to be the guy that takes over. And that's where other things get interesting. People talk a lot about the recycling of coaches and GMs. It is a thing. A lot of the guys on this board have been GMs for other teams. And I think part of it is public pressure. If you have an opening for a brand new GM, and if you've got a team that's, say, expected to be in the playoffs, you're going to look for somebody who's got experience and shown they can already do the job. You're not going to want the brand new guy, right? So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see if Cheveldayoff ends up in any kind of hot water if Winnipeg gets completely destroyed in the playoffs by Edmonton. That'll be the matchup right now, and based on the last 6 games these teams have played against each other, Edmonton's just at another level compared to Winnipeg. would that affect Cheveldayoff's job or no? So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.